was when I first got into minimalism. It was really popular at the time to, declutter your fantasy self. Your fantasy self is holding you back.
I was like, oh geez, really?
Okay. Hey there, my handsome and pretty little Cobras, and welcome back to the Cobras. And for those of you who are new, my name is Mignon Cobra and I make minimalism videos. So today's minimalism video is going to be never declutter your fantasy self. So without further ado, let's just get into the video. Let's go. Woo. So as you guys know, I've been a minimalist for a really long time. 8 years, maybe going on 9 soon. It's the end of the year. And something that I think is really interesting is this idea of fantasy self. So when I first heard of this whole notion of decluttering your fantasy self was when I first got into minimalism. It was really popular at the time to, declutter your fantasy self. Your fantasy self is holding you back.
I was like, oh geez, really?
Okay. So I kind of sort of did it, and right off the bat, I hated it. Like, why would I declutter my fantasy self? That made no sense to me. It's my fantasy self. That's who I'm trying to become. So I have actually made a video on this. I talked about why I never ended up decluttering my fantasy self, even though that is a really big minimalism rule. And I'm going to talk today about 3 reasons why I'm so glad that 8 years ago I made that firm decision that I was not going to declutter my fantasy self. And I wanted to sit here and make this video in case that this can help anybody else out in their minimalism journey, that you don't have to declutter your fantasy self in order to be a good minimalist. Okay, number 1. So your fantasy self is your soul speaking to you. If your fantasy self, and I mean, obviously, disclaimer, it's what you want, or is it what society tells you to want? That is something that you need to soul search and figure out for yourself. But generally speaking, the things that excite you and make you feel very motivated for life, that's your soul speaking to you. And I don't want to be overly religious, I'm religious. I grew up Catholic and now I'm Buddhist. So for me, spirituality has always been up there. I have never questioned spirituality. I am very in touch with my higher power and the universe and law of manifestation. I believe in all of the spiritual woohoo stuff. So for me, when my soul is speaking to me, I am fully in tune with that. And I just didn't understand why I would declutter something that brought me joy. I don't know. It didn't work for me. I'm glad that could work for somebody else to declutter their fantasy self. Maybe it really was holding them back. But for me personally, that was the driver. That's the thing that made me wake up in the morning. Because if I couldn't be who I wanted to be, then what the hell was the point of all of this? Okay, number 2, and this is actually the point that I wanted to talk about, is kind of distinguishing, is this marketing or is this really what you want? So that is a really big key thing to take away, because a lot of people kind of say that your fantasy self is the whole luxury living, yacht riding, airplane flying, luxury self. And I mean, if that is your version of your fantasy self, great. But for me, I kind of had to figure out what aspects of my fantasy self were just marketing and which ones really were what we're calling my soul. And along in decluttering everything, because there's a phase where I went monk mode, I realized that life's not that deep, and so since life's not that deep, then you should just do whatever you want. And in which case, I actually don't care even if it's marketing speaking to me. Yeah, sure, market that right up to me. If I can afford to do so, I will definitely partake in that, because honestly, at the end of the day, the end result for all of us, as morbid as it sounds, is that we all die. And so since we all die, well, you might as well have a good time then. But anyway, coming back to my point, is kind of figuring out, is this marketing or is this what you really want? And I think that can definitely help a lot. There's a lot of marketing stuff that I had to cut out of my life that I was that is just not for me. It is really popular, this whole narrative of always dyeing your hair and having branded clothing. I used to dye my hair like crazy and it ruined my hair, so I realized that is not for me. Branded clothing, I also realized, was part of my insecurities with myself. I'm not saying that these things are part of yours, and if you wear branded clothes you're insecure. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying for me personally, I had to distinguish what is my fantasy self and which is not. Some fantasy self version of me though is I really wanted to be a YouTuber and I wanted to be pretty on camera, and so I still wear makeup. And is that part of my fantasy self? Yeah, probably. Is it marketing? Yeah, probably. But it's okay. And for me personally, I would rather be indulging my fantasy self than telling myself I couldn't have those things. That was an awful way to live. Okay, number 3. So if you're still unsure of what your fantasy self is, I would recommend trying monk mode. So in monk mode, what I did was, I did this for actually about 2 years. For 2 years, I fully stripped from my identity. So what I did was it was a full reset. I decluttered out of my life everything that I thought was, I don't even know, materialistic. So I stopped wearing makeup. I stopped doing feminine hygiene things like plucking my hair or anything that, within Buddhism and letting go of the material world and the material plane, I let go of all of that, and I practiced being Zen and meditation for about 2 years to see what came to the surface. And among my Zen journey, I realized that there were a lot of things that still kept calling my soul. And the thing that freed me was this koan, which was a monk. He was talking to his 2 disciples and he was what is the meaning of life? And one of them was to suffer. So the monk was so go suffer for my son. And then he asked the other one, what is the meaning of life? And he was like, to be happy. And he's like, okay, my son, go be happy. So when I realized that, I was like, wait, what? We're allowed to pick how we want to live our lives? I was like, well, then I'm just gonna go enjoy my life then. And that's actually a very popular movie. It's called The Monk Goes to the Mountain. It's a Chinese movie about a monk who actually decides to partake in the good life. He becomes a doctor and he marries a beautiful woman. I mean, he has a very terrible ending in the end, but the point is that he realized that he was actually okay with leaving behind the monastic life for a life of fantasy, because at the end of the day, life's not that deep. I hope that this could have entertained you and given you motivation to know that you don't need to declutter your fantasy self. Like, you don't have to be, you know, a white wearing, hair shaven minimalist that doesn't wear makeup in order to be a good minimalist. Like, not at all. I mean, if that's part of your journey, congrats, but it doesn't have to be that way. Oh yes, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.